It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to this webinar on what you need to know about digital inclusion now. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that the Marconi Society is dedicated to creating a connected world where information and communications technologies empower everyone to reach their full potential. This webinar is just one example of how we do that. So, if we can have the next slide. I'd like to say a few words about our digital inclusion training program. This is a collection of 5 online video modules covering topics that successful leaders need to understand to bring the benefits of the internet to everyone. This is available through the Marconi Society. In addition, as noted here at the top, these videos were created in partnership with Arizona State University. And if we can move on to the next slide. Arizona State uses this curriculum for their Digital Inclusion Leadership Certificate. So I'm happy to announce the next cohort is beginning on September 23rd. If you are interested, you may register for that program, and you can get more information from Karen Mossberger, who directs that program at ASU. Her email there is there at the bottom of the screen, karen.mossberger@asu.edu. Well, I think that does it for announcements. And now I'd like to turn this over to my colleague, Paula Reinman, who's the Director of Marketing and Communications for the Marconi Society. Paula, over to you.
Thanks so much, Barry. Welcome to our panelists and our guests. We're really thrilled to have all of you here with us. As Barry mentioned, I'm Paula Reinman, responsible for strategy, marketing, and communications at the Marconi Society. Today, I'm honored to lead a conversation with some true digital equity warriors. These are people who have created the technology, researched the impacts, and built the movement that's gotten us to the point in funding and awareness around digital equity that we're at today. Angela Seifer, John Chiaffi, and Roberto Gallardo are all featured experts in the Marconi Society's digital inclusion training programs that Barry mentioned. And these programs are designed to help build the country's digital equity talent pipeline. We're privileged to have them here today to share their current thinking with us. We will have time for questions at the end, so please put your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will come back to them. So welcome, Angela, Roberto, and John. I'd like to start by asking each of you to please introduce yourself and tell us why broadband became your passion. Roberto, I'll start with you.
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Glad to be here. Honored to be here. I am an Ag Econ faculty member here at Purdue University. But I started my career back at Mississippi State, and one of the areas that we were dealing with back then was digital exclusion. So that's what got me into this fantastic field. I'm currently the Vice President for Engagement here at Purdue, so my role has changed slightly, but I'm still very, very interested in the topic, and I had the pleasure of directing the Purdue Center for Regional Development for 3 years, who has partnered with organizations like Angela's and others across the country trying to work for digital inclusion. So thank you, Paula, for the opportunity of being here today.
Thanks, Roberto. And we're so looking forward to your perspective on rural broadband and community development. So we're real thrilled to have you. Angela.
Thank you, Paula. Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Seifer. I'm the Executive Director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, one state over from Roberto. I think broadband for me is about the humans that are involved in the technology. I love the tech, right? I enjoy it personally, but it's the piece that touches all of us, and our success often is dependent upon how well we are able to use it and if we even have access to it. So I've been fortunate enough to work with lots of folks who are addressing this issue in their communities, and they inspired me to start NDIA almost 10 years ago.
Thank you, Angela. And what a 10 years it's been. And we're all grateful to you for your leadership in building this national movement together with so many others. And John.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Chiaffi. I'm with the Marconi Society. I was a fellow in 2006 and joined their board of directors a few years later and have been on the board for about 20 years now or so. But probably a little better known as a Stanford professor. I'm a technologist. I work in the area of the technologies that underline broadband and help develop many of the techniques that are used widely today, whether it's copper, DSL cable, or fiber systems, as well as the wireless systems. But perhaps today, in the context of digital inclusion, I'm CEO and chairman of a small company that has worked over the decades with hundreds of millions of customers around the world in terms of their broadband connectivity, how well is it performing, could it do better, and so forth. So the infrastructure that would support inclusion, which of course we all know is very expensive to build. So happy to be here today, and in that context, my passion would be to see better internet to everybody.
Thanks, John. Thanks for being here. And without your innovations and your creative thinking, we would not have much of what we all rely on today. So it's a pleasure to have you. So let's jump in. Angela, I'd like to address this first question to you, and then for all these questions, of course, everybody should jump in as they have something to add. So you were starting, Angela, by saying digital equity. You started 10 years ago in this field, in digital inclusion, actually. And as we've grown, we have what is now, I think to many, a fairly new field with lots of new entrants because of the growth. And I'd love your perspective on why it's important to have a national workforce that understands the interdisciplinary basics of digital equity, the policy, the technology, the programs.
We're so very fortunate to have the attention on this issue that we didn't have before. Like I'm constantly grateful for that. I'm also a little irritated that it took a pandemic for folks to realize that we needed it, but trying to stay on the positive side. But the reality is we do need this workforce to help our community members, our neighbors, our friends, our family be able to use the internet. The digital divide is not just a technology issue, it's rooted in technology, but the way that we actually address it is actually the humans. So those humans are essential to understanding how to use it, to overcoming fear, to having somebody who can tell you something again and again and again, because it's really confusing and I didn't get it the first 3 times. And you're like, it's okay, it's no problem. We're just going to talk about it one more time and we're going to maybe come at it at a different angle and see if that helps you. So that kind of knowledge of how our fellow humans operate and work and their insecurities, along with the technology understanding of how the tech works, that's a magical kind of mix for any individual. And that's a workforce that we need to celebrate and support. So they need to have that training in order to do their jobs and have the greatest impact that we all want them to have.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, and what we actually see too, as we talk to more and more people who get trained in this very new field, is that the areas that really help them are they love being able to use data to tell stories and to gather internal and external commitment and resources from their organizations. They love being able to build digital equity ecosystems by understanding all the places that broadband and digital equity connect. They love being better policy advocates. So it's such a broad field, and there are so many ways for people to contribute, particularly once they have the basic fundamentals. Roberto, I know that you've been in this space, as you said, for a while, and you've researched, you've been out in communities. So many things in our world are changing daily. What are some of the constant truths around digital equity?
Sure. As Angela pointed out, right, it's way more than the technology. And but as the technology continues to evolve, there will always be somebody that needs help. And so it may be defined today as a binary yes, no access to DSL or cable or whatever the case may be, or computers or digital literacy. But the topics themselves will evolve, the applications will evolve. And so that's what I have come to realize in my work, is that we may make some progress over here, but then another opportunity opens up over here where a group is being left behind because something came up new, or they don't have access to, or they don't know how to use it, or they can't afford it. And so I think that that's very important to keep in mind, is that even though technology changes quickly and applications and so forth, there will always be a particular group of folks that will need help. And sometimes you're not going to need it, and sometimes you will need it. And so we have to be mindful of that highly dynamic ecosystem under which digital equity takes place. And so it is something that we have to have hanging over our heads constantly, because as Angela said, unfortunately, it took a pandemic for people to realize, and I hope that this momentum continues. But as you know, there will be other pressing issues coming and going. And so it's important to not lose sight that digital equity is here to stay, and it will be changing over time. But at the end of the day, we want folks, any community, any geography, to be able to prosper and thrive in this increasingly digitizing world. So, if it were just a portion of our economy that's being affected, then you would say, okay, we can kind of manage, but it's not. It's everything, right? And of course, COVID showed that very, very clearly.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think, people on this call would agree that digital equity is a basic human right, without which it is very hard to have opportunity to grow and prosper, or even to keep up. So thanks for reminding us of those truths. Kind of building on what you said, Roberto, about things are always changing and there's always different people that need help in different ways. As we all know, huge amounts of money are now being allocated to bringing everyone online in a meaningful way. We also know the technology, applications, and devices never stand still, and we are always going to need to update, upskill, and educate people to help them get the most out of broadband. There will never be the end to the divide, no matter what. So, John, from an infrastructure perspective, how will the technology continually help people get better connectivity in a more affordable way as we go forward?
Well, yeah, thank you, Paula. And perhaps I'll start because we heard a little bit about the pandemic and infrastructure and that. Just a comment. I had the unique opportunity last year, 2023, to meet with the president, Biden, and people saw us off camera, off microphone, laughing. And everyone asked me, what did he say to you? And what he said to me then was, so you're the guy who's responsible for my granddaughter's excessive use of the internet. And I responded to him. I said, no, I just build the infrastructure, Mr. President. It's you who provides the messages to everyone. So if you look at getting connectivity to everyone and productive uses, as has been stated here previously, you have to have a system that supports that. And that's an expensive system. It has been for a long time. To do that, there's probably $1 trillion of investment in the broadband infrastructure to date over the last couple of decades or so. And it will take another several trillion to get to the point where everybody has full connectivity. As we all know, nations like the United States, through our BEAD program and Infrastructure Act, have allocated anywhere from 40 to $100 billion, how you look at it. Other countries have done the same. It's an expensive endeavor. And if we're going to spend that kind of money to support and build the economies that we're talking about, whether the applications are good or bad, via the president's comment, how do we best spend that? And in my context in industry over the last 15 years or so, I had the privilege to be able to look at the data, the products that my company, Aussie Inc., supplied were software, but we actually saw the link connectivity to all of the broadband users. And there is a tremendous amount of information that's available. We should not be fooled by the broadband mapping problems of the FCC or elsewhere. That data exists, but it's owned by the telecom service providers. If that could be federated and used, it would allow us to take those billions or tens of billions or even hundreds of billions that are being allocated and use it in a productive fashion without compromising the privacy of anyone in the process, to put that expenditure, to put that expense in the places where it's most needed. And that is one of the biggest issues, is how our funds, when they are allocated or subsidies are provided, how are they best used so that that money is well spent? And how do we measure and how do we evaluate that we have made good use of those funds afterward, and that everyone is being connected well, and then all the growth and opportunities that better connectivity can provide to us, we could exploit better with the infrastructure expenditures that we make.
Mhm. Mhm. So, and are there advancements that you see in the technology itself? You've talked about some really great, really fascinating thoughts about, how we figure out where there is connectivity, where there is not connectivity. Are there other technology trends that you think we should be thinking about in terms of always better, more affordable internet access?
Well, the wireless area, has been growing in its use. Both cellular and Wi-Fi are all familiar with that and perhaps use them on a daily basis. They are opportunities to maybe spend less and get further out to everyone. What is important is, if we're going to build infrastructure, initially the false impression is, well, we have to run a fiber everywhere. Well, that's a simple answer, and most politicians, in fact, will tell you that that's what they need to do. But if the end connectivity to the devices we're using is some kind of wireless form, and that's limiting, then spending all the money on the fiber infrastructure didn't help, because the end consumer is still not getting what they wanted because the limit wasn't in that particular portion of the network. So if you have access to the data that I was talking about, you can see, what is the limit? What is the bottleneck that's preventing better internet connectivity to this region? And then focus on that as the next place you spend your money to improve things. And so incrementally measuring, recursively going back and saying, okay, how do we do here and how can we do better, is a better use of the funds, and it'll get everybody connected better and more quickly and with less cost than the way we do it now, which is basically kind of throw a lot of money at it and hope that is well spent to provide better connectivity.
Thanks so much. And Angela and Roberto, how do you see us continually bridging the divide through policy, programs, and advocacy? Where do you see the next divides coming in terms of upcoming technology and developments?
I think the most obvious one is AI. Will create another digital divide. The folks who understand how to use it, who are integrating it into their work and their personal life, and who have found ways where they think it is reasonable to use it, not of course the ways where we're doing harm with it, because there's lots of those also. But on the positive side of it, the folks who figure that out, and then the folks who don't, and the ones who can't use it in their jobs will be impacted, right? So that will cause the next technological digital divide. But that's not to say the divides we have right now are all going to be solved with this federal investment. We will have more people who have connections to the physical infrastructure. That's amazing. The physical infrastructure will exist in more places. and we will have helped people get connected to that in those places and in some other places where it already existed. We will have helped some folks get devices. We will have helped folks understand how to use it. And then, as Roberto said, that technology is going to keep changing. So we won't actually be done with this job. We will never be done with this job. It's a very sad kind of job security. So we have to make sure that we are constantly figuring out how we keep paying for this, because this investment is not going to solve the problem, and we do need to have funding continuously working on this. And that is a huge challenge. And part of what we have to have are the storytelling, the data, the folks who will go out there and talk about it. Because if we don't keep talking about it, if you live in a bubble where everybody around you has access, then if you're not stepping outside of that area to see folks that don't have access, you won't think it's something that needs to be solved. You won't think it's a problem that needs to be addressed. So because many of us live in our bubbles, we need to make sure that we are talking about it and getting it into the media and talking to our policymakers so that we can keep figuring out the financial solutions to be able to address the issue.
And Paula, I would only add to that, related to the bubbles, is we have to, whatever we do to continuously bridge this issues, we have to be responsive. We cannot be in silos, as Angela alluded to. That's very important because it's very difficult for you to really grasp how hard it is for somebody that does not have a desktop or a laptop or whatever the case may be, or that just feels intimidated by opening a browser, right? And so we have got to be responsive. We have got to have a high degree of empathy to truly understand what these groups are going through. And here's the kicker, though, that it's going to dynamically change, right? As Angela pointed out, right now it's going to be AI, or it's coming up to be AI, but the other divides continue. And so I think that for us to continuously identify, obviously funding is critical. We have to make sure we are responsive. We have to make sure there is a mechanism for us to identify the issues and then react, both through funding and programming, and just putting a human touch to something that's ironically digital, right? And so that's super, super important.
One of the things that would be super helpful would be if we had a national digital equity plan so that we understood, and we're learning so much right now with this current federal investment. Like, that's so exciting. So this is a perfect time to gather up the data to create this plan, to figure out exactly different populations, the different ways that they need assisted, because it really varies a lot out there, and all the different resources that we currently have right now, how those items can all work together. There's been talk about the different ways that the federal government and the states are addressing the lack of broadband infrastructure, and how sometimes those programs overlap, and that kind of issue needs to be addressed. It's the same thing with digital equity. We have fewer resources, so there's less like, oh no, we're spending money in the same place. That doesn't really happen. There's more like, oh no, there's not enough money to do everything that needs to be done, or not enough programming to serve all the people that need to be served. And so understanding what those resources are and how to fill in the gaps, and everybody making the most of a tight budget, that would be an amazing step forward for the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Roberto, coming back for a second to your points where you were saying we need to be responsive, we need to be integrated. Can you share an example of where you think, an example of success in that way? Have you seen something that you think would be a model?
So a model per se, I mean, I can share with you a couple of critical elements that are needed for this to be dynamic and responsive. And obviously it boils down to community development 101, which is champions, right? You need champions. And this is really where it becomes personal. We all know that broadband is a local issue. What I mean with that is that, it has to be in part resolved locally. And so for that to happen, it has to become a community or a group priority. And for that, you have a champion that's kind of constantly, advocating for this or just bringing it up to the attention. In the communities I work with, Paula, they have competing issues. They have healthcare issues. They have lack of jobs. And so digital inequity is just one more issue that they have to really balance and decide because of scarcity of resources and time and leadership. Many times you don't have the luxury of trying to put work towards everything. So those are the key elements that I believe will make any system responsive. And then obviously that champion needs to have a high degree of empathy, right? And the group that is trying to respond, because without empathy, again, it's super hard for you to truly understand, what is happening, why not addressing that issue is having, real life consequences on folks. That's another piece, Paula, that I think we need to do a better job informing, and Angela's group does a phenomenal job in that respect, is that even though it takes place online, digital inclusion, there are offline consequences and vice versa. And so that's super important to not silo them and separate them, because they really are not separated in real life.
Yeah. That's a great point. Angela, this next one, I'll start with you. I know that you and others have fought very, very hard to have funding for the Affordable Communications Program, or the ACP, restored. And thank you very much, you and all the others who have fought and continue to fight that battle. What can people on this call do to help their community stay connected in the most affordable way possible?
Yeah, when we lost ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program, it was quite the blow. We had all really developed programs. The federal government had developed programs, the state had developed programs, relying upon that benefit to households to be able to cover the $30 portion of their internet bill, 75 in tribal land. So it was incredible. Our reality now is that we have to figure out what is available. Some of the internet service providers have some reasonable cost plans. Some of them have lower cost plans that are only available to certain populations. So NDIA has an honor roll of these types of plans. We have a table where you can see what's there. If you all know of one that's not on there, this is kind of a rolling project for us. So if you want to send it to us, we'll prioritize getting that one on. But what we also did is started to grade them. So we think every internet service provider should have a low-cost offer that's available to households that are struggling to afford internet. And so we thought it would help if we gave them some standards and some best practices. So we didn't want this to be a, knock them on the head if they're not doing right, more of a let's celebrate those that are doing great. And then don't you want to be on the list? So we there's a grading system, but really any of them that ended up on having a grade at all, because there's reasons why we don't include them at all. So if they ended up there, kudos to them for doing something. But if they're not at the top of the scale, they can see what it is they can do to improve that offer. So at a local level, you can encourage your internet service providers to have this kind of a low cost offer. And then you can use this gig project as a way to encourage them with specifics on how they can make it better.
Yeah, I know it's a challenge to just like piece together the best information that we have right now, but it's the best plan given where we are. John, you had talked about some of the data that's available, and ways that we could, if the data was out there and federated, actually see where the bottlenecks are. I'm curious about what types of measurement and evaluation systems you think should be put in place during this period of extensive spending to ensure that people really receive the promise of broadband for the investment that's being made?
Yeah, well, one of the issues, and it goes back a ways, is we tend to grade, like, for instance, the FCC had what they call the broadband reports. They now have the broadband mapping program. Those are based on data that's very scant, somewhat incredibly unreliable type things. And so you hear a lot of complaints about that. The feeling is that the real data doesn't exist on the kind of, it does exist. I know the products we sold created that data. I've seen it. It exists on every single connection, at least every 15 minutes. It's monitored. You can go down to 5 seconds to see how things are working and whether that's doing well. And that doesn't compromise anyone's privacy. If the data were made available in the right way and used in the right way, whatever application is being used by the most impoverished or the most rich user of artificial intelligence to span that gap, those who are providing the applications that are helping the people use the internet to do better things can correlate, because they have access to their customers, right? They can correlate that data and they can see, is this a connection issue? Is this something else that's causing this? And so that would enrich the type of data that you're talking about collecting from the consumers to do that. What we have had, unfortunately, with the ACP and other programs like that is, if you talk to some of the politicians in the House or the Senate about this, and they'll say, well, you know, they're trying to get elected, right? Whether it's this year or another year. And they'll say, well, I got $50 million for my district. Vote for me. But, you know, how do we know that that was spent well? Where's the future looking? Well, the data exists. And if we could get that and we could encourage, and there'll have to be some kind of incentive for the data to be federated and released, but there are financial ways of doing that. A number of, you know, anywhere from subsidies to fair share planning and other things that are ideas out there, that if you could correlate that, then you begin to see that, yeah, I'm really having an impact. This application that I'm using in an underprivileged area, whatever, is working, and the money we're spending is doing well, because we can see that it's not necessarily an infrastructure problem, or it is one, and we should spend money there to fix that problem, or it's something else. They don't know how to use the internet or some other thing, some portion of the problem that's not getting any money is actually the cause, and not, let's just spend a bunch of money, run fiber closer, and get elected for that. So that federated system, I'm convinced that any country who does that, whether it's the United States or China or somebody else, is probably going to lead the internet in the next decades if they get that federated system together, and they will advance better because of it, and they'll address the inequities as well as the opportunities throughout to do that. But without that kind of feedback, it just kind of one group kind of yelling at another group, and people profiting from large amounts of money that have been made available, but we don't actually know that achieved the purpose that we wanted it to achieve. If we paid for internet service for a lot of people and they weren't using it, well, what's the reason they're not using it? Was it not good enough, or they need training? Is it an infrastructure problem? Maybe it's not an infrastructure. Maybe it should be something else where that money goes to help bring equality to all. And that, of course, will get exacerbated as artificial intelligence becomes more and more in use. It's going to require super high bandwidths to everyone to support it. And the issues will become more profound as all of the global economies advance.
Yeah. There's a lot to think about there, a lot to unpack. Let me also, before we go on to our last couple of questions, remind people that there's Q&A box, and feel free to put your questions in. We're going to have plenty of time for them. So, Roberto, we've spoken a bit about, you know, what you've seen in rural communities, and you make a compelling case for these rural communities to consider the economic benefits of broadband as they're prioritizing their scarce resources. Can you share a success story of building a broadband mindset in a rural community and what we can all learn from that?
Sure, Paula, and I think it's very, very similar to the answer I gave or the comments I made earlier, in the rural communities I've worked with, there are local champions that make the difference. I cannot emphasize that enough, and I should also clarify, Paula, that there are, this broadband mindset is also important in urban communities as well. They just approach it in a different way. They may have different digital divides that are affecting them, but at the end of the day, this broadband mindset needs to acknowledge that the industrial age is no more, and that the digital age is upon us. And that's important to keep in mind because there are some subtle but large differences that are happening. And let me give you just one example of what is a telltale sign for me that a rural community at least is changing their mindset. And that is that we are no longer thinking in the 90s, early 2000s mentality of manufacturing and attraction and all that kind of stuff. They truly look more inward, and they can do that because they understand the advantages and disadvantages, the barriers and the opportunities of the digital age. And so that's a very subjective topic, abstract to a certain extent, Paula, but I can tell you that you can, in my experience, you can immediately say if it's urban or rural, regardless, that it has clicked. This broadband, I call it the broadband mindset, but it can be the digital mindset as well. And that makes all the difference, Paula, because that then brings us back to what Angela was saying, that then we realize and we want to put funding into this. John, we want to get better data. You've mentioned there's a ton of data out there, but it's not publicly available. As a data researcher, that's super frustrating, but it is what it is, right? And so, but you have got to have that mindset to set it as a priority, and more importantly, Paula, make it sustainable. And so, for example, one state that is really blowing my mind, and I was at one point competing with them here in Indiana, but North Carolina is doing phenomenal work with their digital equity plans at the county level. I think they've got all 100 counties now with that. Here in Indiana, we have about a third of our counties that have completed that. Mm-hmm. That's important, right? It's not a national plan like Angela alluded to, but it's important because it is there. It is creating initially a group of folks, a task force, but eventually a coalition that will go beyond those county border lines and make it sustainable. And then you start talking that they have really understood and taking advantage of that digital mindset. That was a long answer, but there, you so.
It's a great answer, and I also really love that you brought up the example of North Carolina, and we've actually hosted a webinar with Tracy Dokes from MCNC and Nate Denny from the State Broadband Office and some of their leaders in healthcare and education in the state. And I would also agree that they've done a really fantastic job of thinking about how broadband touches the key things, the key areas that people need, how they do that, how they really plan for that in a state with large rural population. And so I love that example.
And just like Angela alluded to as well, I'm super excited as a social scientist to see what happens over time. You're now going to have a natural experiment of 100 counties, and you're going to be able to see where it remained sustainable, where it did not, what happened, right? The best practices, lessons learned, because that will in turn generate a wealth of information that can then be used to better understand this highly dynamic landscape, right? And so I'm super excited about that. And well, if you multiply that times the Digital Equity Act, you're talking the entire country. Each state did it differently. I mean, it's just fascinating. So
yeah, I'm fascinated to see if the states that invested in ecosystems, like the local digital equity planning, the helping people talk to each other, the coalitions. So there's a lot of investment in coalitions in the state of New York. Maine has put a lot of time into coalitions. Massachusetts has put a lot of time into into training local governments to create plans. They were doing additional technical assistance training to regional organizations to provide that kind of support to local governments. Like the places that have invested in that kind of capacity building and expertise and planning at the local level, and that folks know each other and will work on these problems together. I'm gonna say In 10 years, we're going to look back and be like, those states that I just named, wow, they're a little further. Ohio, right? The places where there's strong coalitions, those places are a little further ahead than some of the other states.
Yeah, I would agree. I would add Maryland to your list. I think they've
Yeah.
done a really fantastic job, and I think that's right. I think it'll be really interesting to see longer term, you know, how that early investment in ecosystems and coalitions plays out. So this has kind of taken us into our question about what you're most excited about for the coming year. And John, do you have anything that you'd like to add about what you're most excited about this year?
Well, the internet has continued to expand and create, opportunities for everyone on a global basis, and it's going to continue to do so. Broadband connectivity, my specialty is kind of a foundational, kind of paving the road, if you will, for the messages that will come. I think that's going to continue. I'd like to see it continue in an efficient manner, and that will support all of the types of things, the coalitions and other things, finding the best ways. There needs to be that infrastructure evolution to support, whether it's artificial intelligence or some kind of distributed computing or massive connectivity that we don't even know today. I'm sure if you talk to anyone who was involved in the early internet, none of us anticipated exactly how it was going to get used and what would be there. We just kind of, if you build it, they will come type of mentality. But we're evolving. It's going to continue to improve, and let's make sure that the money really goes to the best places to help that occur, rather than maybe just throw a lot of money at it and hope, so to speak. So it'll continue to evolve, and we're all going to benefit from it. But hopefully, we can get a little better at how we conduct that evolution.
Yeah, and I think your point about, you know, the continuing to see the uses and the applications from people who have not had connectivity yet, and really seeing how it can benefit them is going to be an exciting area. So I'm going to move into some questions. I'm going to actually start with one of my own. Not that I haven't gotten to ask a whole bunch of them, but I've got a whole list of them from our conversation. So I'm going to start with one of my own. And Angela, this one is for you, and actually for all of you. We've talked about how important storytelling is, and the narrative, and helping people understand, you know, reminding people over and over again. And so I'm curious, and Angela, this is what made me think of this particularly for you. I know that you've done a lot of work with policymakers testifying in front of Congress. I'm interested in what resonates the most with policymakers. What kinds of stories, what kinds of information really resonate and move the needle?
Yeah, I think it's the stories where they can relate to the story being told. It sounds like it could be their mom. It sounds like it could be their nephew, right? The people have some personality traits that are familiar. And it is really about those personal stories and less about the numbers. We're constantly being asked for numbers, and we should definitely have really strong data systems where we're pulling in the data and we can do the analysis and we can say who's been served and in what way. But it's when we're getting people's attention, like a policymaker or the media, or potential new champions. As Roberto noted, those champions are essential. So you got to catch their attention too, because they can make a world of difference when you do. It is the personal stories. It's the stories that someone's like, oh, wait, what did you just say? And then that gets them on the path of learning more about the issue.
For sure. It's like my 101-year-old father-in-law. And when I told him the ACP was going away, he said to me, honey, he goes, I'm sure they're keeping it for veterans. And I said, no, sorry, no. So actually that reminder of stories over numbers is really great. When anybody have anything else they want to add there? So there's a couple of questions around ACP and affordable internet. So let me just put them out there, and on the questions, I'll just let you guys jump in as you would like to. So there's one, can you provide any update on renewal activities related to ACP that's part of the RIP and replace legislation? And then there's another question, how do you see the Lifeline program, federal and state where available, being an affordability tool?
We
So
thought we
I'll
were
let-
we thought we were so close, like again and again, to getting ACP renewed. We thought we might build just for one more year, so that we can then figure out this whole universal service fund business and have a long-term solution. And it will be really hard, but we can really do it. And every time we thought we were super close, we weren't. And so we're not super close anymore. There's nothing in front of us that would say this is a potential anytime soon, especially with the election coming up. NDIA and other advocates have moved on to other things that are a better use of our time right now. But that's not to say we're going to be done fighting. We just have to create that new opportunity where we can get in there and figure out the funding. Worst case scenario, and I do consider this worst case scenario, is that we don't get any bridge funding. I suppose this is like second from worst case. Worst case is universal service never comes around to figuring out how to get fixed, and we don't have money for a connectivity solution. That would be super, super worst, but I think there is a path towards modernizing universal service fund. And so we are very likely to not end up with the bridge funding. We will keep fighting for it, but likely to end up with not bridge funding. And so it's going to take us multiple years to figure out universal service fund. We, in the big sense of we, like the whole country kind of we, lots of folks involved. And so eventually we'll get to a place where there will be a benefit for broadband service, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. Oh, and then the Lifeline question, do you want me to answer that one, Paula?
Sure, go for it.
So Lifeline is $9.25. Most folks use it for a mobile phone service, not for a home internet connection. And I take this moment to remind everyone, those of us who can afford both have both. We should not be thinking that a great way for a low-income household to really thrive and succeed in life is to get by on one of those, because that's not how we survive. That's not how we thrive. That's not how I thrive. And we need to make sure folks have both. $9.25 also doesn't really do much for a home internet connection. The $30 subsidy was much more in the correct range of numbers to address it. So I think in terms of a super backup plan, yes, we can guide people towards Lifeline so that they can utilize it. But it is really like the teeniest of Band-Aids.
Great. John, there's one on here for you regarding the importance of data collection, analysis, and application. How or should data for the purpose of developing robust solutions be stratified around the issues of race, economic disparity, and regions?
I don't have a good answer to that. The type of data that I'm talking about is really link type of data. So it's independent of the race or the stratification that's suggested in the question. In fact, asking the owners of that data to provide it, you can incentivize them with money or help in different ways to do that. But you probably would not want to ask them to do that on a basis, that type of basis. That would be better done by the types of things that Angela's been talking about, the groups that do that, to take that and then perform that elsewhere so that you remove any bias from that perspective. From a technical perspective, what you need is called an API, application programmers interface, that would be made available maybe in exchange for subsidies, or maybe there are tiers of it. Some of it's sold to the application companies who might use it, others being available publicly or to the regulators to do that. And then that data can be used to correlate against the population statistics or the use or the applications or other things of it. But it is very non-racial, not related to the amount of income you make or necessarily even where you live, except you would have geographic areas for it, so you would know at least that much. But it does not really depend on who is the recipient. It's just telling you what is the connectivity to that individual or to that household or whatever. And is it good? Are there outages? Are there issues with it? Does it make it hard for the consumer to get the service that they supposedly have paid for? Is it good enough to support migration to AI applications in the future? That's all inferable from that data, but it doesn't stratify in terms of race or economic power, other than maybe geographic location might be correlated in some cases with that.
Right, yeah. So you'd know geography, but you would not know any accompanying demographics associated with location.
That's right. And you can anonymize the data even so that it doesn't, that what's made publicly available would not be particular to an individual, just be to a region, so that you're basically providing statistics for that region rather than individual, individual addresses. Actually, consumption of internet might be a little bit too much. So it can be done that way.
Yeah. We have a couple of questions about AI, and I'll kind of open up an open discussion on AI here. So there's one that says AI is likely to unlock significant potential for those that were not significant potential that was not possible before. That could affect populations disproportionately. I'm curious about the high-level direction strategies you think we can employ to make sure that AI is done in a digitally equitable way. And then there is also a question about AI training resources that are available. So let me just open that up for the next few minutes and let anyone who wants to weigh in do so.
NDIA has started a working group of some of our community members. This is how we do. NDIA does a lot of our work, is the experts are on the ground doing the digital inclusion work. So we gather up some experts. We've gathered up some experts who are figuring out how to integrate AI into digital skills training. And so we're in a learning mode right now based upon those that are trying different things in their communities. And we are going to provide some significant assistance to one community that's doing that, so we can again get some more data to you so we can understand how this works. There is a curriculum out there now, so NDIA does not expect that we will create any curriculum, but we do think it's important to see what curriculum is there and which ones are valuable to community-based digital skills programming. A lot of the AI curriculum that we've come across is either K-12, there's a good amount of that, and so some of that can be adjusted for an adult population. And there's AI curriculum for when you're a little bit more advanced. But if you want more entry level, because you're still understanding exactly how a browser works, then if you're in that kind of mode and you want to understand AI, it's a different kind of training. And so we're figuring out what's out there now, what are the gaps, what might need to be created. Don't expect that we would be doing it, but we could put it out there that it's needed to be done. And then as we do everything, all of our research and results will be made publicly available.
Mm-hmm. Any other adds on that? I think, because it's a new technology, there's a couple of layers of there's a couple of layers of training and education that will be required for a long, long time, I think. And one is that kind of end user, or, people who are supporting end users directly. And then, so much also around people who are developing applications and who are developing the interfaces that people work with to make sure that they're trained equitably, and they're trained to take seriously the concerns of everyone and be accurate. And,
One of
and
the-
that's like a whole, inserting digital equity into that thinking is, I think, kind of a whole different path.
It is, and what we're thinking right now is that as programs that do digital inclusion work, if some of them integrate the AI training, those staff members who are doing that kind of integration and some of the individuals they're serving are going to be the perfect people to go be that voice in the room around development and policy conversations about the equity issue, because they will have experienced it from a viewpoint of, we tried to do this, and here's the issues we came across, and here's the some of the problems with how this functioned in a very real example kind of way.
Well,
Yeah.
you could add also, I mean, it was just yesterday and I didn't watch it, but I heard the press on it. The Apple, the latest iPhone was released and the CEO of Apple said, it has artificial intelligence functions that make the intelligent assistant, better. And this is going to drive 5G, which has had issues with respect to driving applications. And he said this will make it viable beyond the fixed wireless access, which is the only part of it making money right now for 5G. 5G is at the higher end of the spectrum in terms of consumers and so forth. So to take advantage of what Angela's talking about, you would want a system that supports the use of that capability to help bring whomever, education or training or others who are benefiting from that, so that they can take advantage of that better connectivity and use the AI to, better their own lives and uses with it. So that's coming. And again, the infrastructure will need to support that distributed AI system that's coming in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, well, great. Well, I'm going to let Barry close us out here in a minute. I'd like to thank the three of you. You've been, really wonderful, and our audience has been great, and I appreciate the insightful questions. We've got a couple we didn't get to, and we will share a replay of the webinar and some highlights. And I'll work with the panelists to see if we can also answer in that highlights article the couple of things we didn't get to, so that everybody can get their questions answered. So thank you all very much. And Barry, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Paula, and thanks again to our panelists for a very insightful and stimulating discussion around these important topics. Just a couple things as we close. Just wanted to mention some of the benefits of being a member of the Marconi Society. Networking opportunities, event advantages, our magazine feature, also the monthly newsletter. I'll say, and there's more to come. We continue to develop and expand on the member benefits here. But with that respect in particular, it looks like Yem has put in the chat the link, and Yem, if you can take us to the next slide. I think that link appears on our closing slide. This is the final slide for today. Just again, thank you to Paula, thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to everyone in the audience for being a part of today's webinar, which, as Paula said, will also be posted for those of you who want to refresh, or for people who were not able to make it with us today. But again, that link to our mailing list is there on the slide, so please consider subscribing to the mailing list, which will keep you up to date on all of our activities here and all of our future webinars on this topic and others of interest. Thanks, everyone.